Yeah, thanks. So when I drew the short straw in the office for this talk this afternoon, the consensus was I would never be able to talk for 6 minutes and 20 seconds. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through this, just a kind of incoherent ramble, really, and the slides will flicker past as we go through it. So Queen's Cross Housing Association is a tenant-controlled organisation. It was formed in 1976. It's one of the community-controlled housing associations in Glasgow, which is a tried and tested model that's stood the test of time. The way it works is that the tenants are able to become members free of charge of the association. They can then elect the board of management, who make all the decisions about how the organisation is run. So we have an open membership, and most of our board of management are local residents and tenants. So it started off with back in the 70s rehabilitating tenements, which a lot of you are probably familiar with that, and filling in the various gap sites through previous demolition programs with new build housing. We've also, so a couple of examples of them there. But we've also grown throughout the years through stock transfers, and I think this is quite an important point which people don't often understand, is that organisations like Queen's Cross don't always get to play with the ball they've chosen, right? So we've acquired stock from Scottish Homes and from Glasgow City Council, and most recently through a second stage transfer from Glasgow Housing Association. So as the previous speaker mentioned, the council transferred its staff to the GHA. The GHA then in some parts of the city devolved that to local community-controlled organisations such as Queen's Cross, but it didn't happen everywhere. So we've now got about 4,000, just over 4,400 flats and houses and homes. They've come from various places, and they've all got their own little problems to deal with. We do about 467 lettings a year, and our annual rental income is about £17.5 million. There's a lot of talk about affordability. So as an example, across the whole of the Queen's Cross stock, our average rent is about £350 a week, which is probably somewhere between 50 and 60% of the market rate. Some people talk about affordability. What I understand that to mean is high quality accommodation that is let at rents that are well below the market rate, not close to it, but well below it. So that's what we're aiming to build on. So because of our kind of financial sustainability over the years, we're able to do a lot of extra things that other organisations can't do. So we do factoring for nearly 2,500 owners on a kind of not-for-profit basis. We let out and rent about 60 workspaces and shops and offices. We support about 500 elderly people with elderly care services. We've got a youth homelessness project that provides accommodation for about 60 people. We do financial inclusion, community regeneration. We provide grants for people to do apprenticeships. We've got a community chest that people can apply to and nominate projects they want to see funded. We've got an award-winning ethnic minority engagement project called Sharing Lives, Sharing Spaces. So it's really good, and the real reason I work for Queen's Cross is it's the only association I know of that has its own dragon boat racing team. Just to give you some of the policy context behind our new build projects which I spend most of my time working on, we're now in year 4 of the government's 5-year plan to fund the building of 50,000 affordable homes. They've got a slightly different definition of affordability than I have, but 35,000 of those are to be social rented homes, which is probably what I think of as being affordable housing. And we're in the process of trying to contribute to meeting that target. Glasgow's contribution to that is 7,500 social rented homes, and it's well on the way to meeting that over the last year. Just over the last financial year, finishing last March, there were about over 1,100 social rented homes built in Glasgow, and we were responsible for quite a few of them. So everybody agrees that community-controlled, locally controlled housing development is a good thing. So why is there not more of it? Well, there are lots of barriers. Land supply has been spoken about. There are plans afoot for a modernised compulsory purchase order scheme, compulsory sales order, community right to buy, and the land value capture ideas that are going around in the taxation system. So if some of them come to fruition, that might help. but basically they're not making any more land, so it's always a problem. Some of the bigger difficulties we have in actually delivering stuff on the ground are to do with the bureaucracy and the disconnect between the government policy and even the council's policy and the way it's enforced at a local area. So there's a huge disconnect in the planning department between what the planners think their obligations are and what the government and the council's priorities really are. Other agencies get to weigh in, like Scottish Water and Scottish Canals. There are huge problems in most of the GAP sites in our area to do with connectivity to the drainage system. There are a lot of technical issues and challenges that need to be, we need to find some creative way around them if we're going to make a real impact in delivering affordable, good quality housing at a scale that is going to make some impact on the problems that we're all facing. The construction industry is in a state of crisis. We're classed for procurement purposes as a public organisation, which means we have to follow public procurement regulations, which are extremely onerous for a very small, relatively small organisation like ours. There are various ways of trying to get builders to cost things, but whichever way you do it, it costs way more than you think it's going to. There's lack of capacity in the building industry around materials and labour and skills. The costs are going through the roof, especially with imported materials from Europe and imported labour from Europe, and it's clearly not going to get any better. In terms of community engagement in the project, it's great in theory, but in practice we work within a lot of constraints which are imposed upon us to do with the various standards that we have to meet in order to qualify for grant. And just to talk about grant, the grant is usually about £72,000 per unit, and we can usually raise about £50,000 a unit. So it means we've got, £122,000 to spend on... Okay, it's running out of time. Okay, so lots of barriers and a lot of key challenges to face. Thank you very much.